For 40 years, everyone thought I was crazy. My children stopped visiting me. My grandchildren grew up hearing whispers that Grandma Maggie went crazy after the accident. My own husband, may God rest his soul, spent the last 5 years of his life looking at me with that mixture of pity and embarrassment that hurts more than any words could. But I'm not crazy. I never went. And now, after 4 decades carrying this burden alone, I finally have proof. Proof that will make the whole world rethink everything it thinks it knows about the forests of Oregon, about what lives in the shadows between the trees, and about who or what really saved my grandson on that autumn day in 1984. It was October 23rd, 1984. A Saturday. I remember every detail of that day as if it were yesterday. The exact color of the golden maple leaves falling along the path. The smell of apple pie my neighbor was making. The sound of my grandson Timothy's laughter as he played in the backyard of our cabin. Timothy was only 5 years old. Curly blonde hair, huge blue eyes, that smile that lit up any room. He was my first grandson, the son of my eldest son, Robert, and he spent every weekend with me and my husband Harold at our property in the Cascade Mountains, near the small town of Estacada. That particular morning, Harold had gone to town to get supplies. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch, checking on Timothy through the window every few minutes as he played with his toy cars near the tree line. Our property was almost 5 acres, with the house surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides. It was approximately 11:15 in the morning when I realized I could no longer hear his voice. Silence in the countryside is different from silence in the city. In the city, silence is the absence of noise. In the countryside, silence is the presence of something wrong. Every father and mother knows this silence, that moment of pure terror when you realize that the child who should be making noise isn't making a sound at all. I dropped the knife I was using to cut carrots and ran to the back door. "Timothy?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the clearing. "Timothy, where are you?" Nothing. Only the wind rustling through the trees and the distant tapping of a woodpecker. I ran through the yard, checking behind the firewood, behind the tool shed, near the small stream that cut through the property. His toy cars were scattered on the grass, abandoned. One of them still had its wheels spinning slowly as if it had been dropped seconds before. "Timothy?" I yelled again, and this time my voice broke with panic. He didn't answer. That's when I saw the footprints. Tiny footprints of children's sneakers, with that zigzag pattern on the sole that I recognized immediately. They were the new sneakers I had bought for him the previous week. The footprints led toward the forest, past the line of trees, and disappeared into the darkness of the woods. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. Timothy knew he shouldn't go into the forest alone. We'd talked about it dozens of times. There were bears there, mountain lions, treacherous cliffs. A 5-year-old could get lost in minutes in that vast green expanse. I didn't think twice. I didn't go back to get the phone. I didn't wait for Harold to come back. I just ran after him. If it were your child, would you have done the same thing? Comment yes or no. The forest swallowed the sunlight the moment I passed the first trees. Suddenly it was cold, damp, and dark. The ground was covered in moss and dead leaves that muffled my footsteps. I kept following the small footprints, calling out his name every few seconds. "Timothy! Timothy! It's Grandma! Where are you, dear?" The footprints continued, deeper, always deeper into the forest. That's when I started to notice something strange. His footprints weren't wandering, as you'd expect from a lost child. They followed an almost straight line, as if Timothy were being guided by something or chasing something. After walking for about 20 minutes, though it felt like hours, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A scream. Not a scream of fear, a scream of pain. Timothy's voice. I started running, stumbling over roots, branches scratching my face and arms. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was reaching him, and then I saw a ravine, a deep cut in the earth that I didn't know existed, probably carved by centuries of erosion. Timothy was at the bottom, maybe 8 meters below where I was. He was on his side, holding his leg, sobbing. "Timothy," I cried, falling to my knees on the edge of the ravine. "Timothy, are you all right?" He looked up, his face covered in tears and dirt. "Grandma, Grandma, I fell. My leg hurts." I quickly assessed the situation. The ravine had steep walls of earth and rocks. There was no safe way down without equipment. If I tried, I would probably fall and hurt myself. 2, leaving us both trapped. I needed to go back, get help, but that meant leaving Timothy alone there for at least an hour, maybe longer. That's when I heard, it wasn't a sound of wind. It wasn't the sound of an ordinary animal. It was something between a low growl and a deep sigh, like the heavy breathing of something very large. And it was coming from inside the forest, right behind me. Is your heart racing too? Comment tachycardia if you're feeling the suspense. I turned slowly, every muscle in my body tense, ready to run or fight, though I had no idea what I would fight against. At first, I saw nothing. Just trees, shadows, the green filter of sunlight through the treetops. But then something moved. Not in the way an ordinary animal moves. Something large, deliberate, intelligent. And then I saw he was maybe 10 meters away, half hidden behind a huge cedar tree. At first, my brain tried to classify what my eyes were seeing. Bears don't stand upright like that, man. Impossible. No man was that tall, that broad. And then he took a step forward, partially emerging from the shadows. My God, he must have been about 2.5 meters tall, maybe more. His body was covered in dark brown fur, not animal fur, but something closer to thick human hair. His shoulders were absurdly broad, his arms long and muscular. His legs were slightly bowed, planted firmly on the ground with a posture that was both animal and strangely human. But it was her face that completely paralyzed me. It wasn't a bear's snout. It wasn't a monkey's face. It was something in between. A broad, flat face, covered in hair but with features that were undeniably ... conscious. Dark, deep eyes that stared at me with clear intelligence. A wide nose. A mouth that was slightly open, revealing teeth that weren't those of predators, but teeth more akin to those of humans. It was impossible. Completely impossible. But there it was, 10 meters from me, as real as the trees around it. Bigfoot. Sasquatch. All the names I'd heard in stories, on late-night TV shows, in jokes people told. But none of the jokes were standing in front of me, breathing, alive, real. I froze, literally unable to move. My mouth was open, but no sound came out. My brain was locked, trying to process the impossible. Behind me, from the bottom of the ravine, Timothy shouted again, "Grandma! Grandma, what is that?" Bigfoot, for there was no other name for him, shifted his gaze from me to the ravine, his head tilted, slightly to the side like a dog hearing a distant sound. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to attack Timothy, that I was about to see my grandson injured or killed by a creature that science said did not exist. But then he did something completely unexpected. He took a step back, and then another. He was backing away. Not out of fear, exactly, but with ... caution? Respect? I don't know how to describe it, but his movements were deliberate, as if he were trying not to scare me more than he already had. If you saw a Bigfoot in front of you, what would your reaction be? Would you run or stand still? "Please," I heard my own voice say, surprised that I could speak. "Please, don't hurt my grandson." Bigfoot stopped. His eyes met mine again, and I swear on my life, there was understanding there. As if he understood not the exact words, but the intention, the emotion behind them. He looked at the ravine again, and then, to my utter shock, he began to walk toward it. Not toward me. He made a wide arc, keeping his distance, until he reached the edge a few feet to my left. "No!" I yelled, thinking he was going to hurt Timothy. "Leave him alone!" But Bigfoot ignored me. He crouched down at the edge of the ravine, his eyes now focused on Timothy below. My grandson had stopped crying and was looking up with an expression of pure awe and terror mixed together. What happened next will seem unbelievable to you. It seemed unbelievable to everyone I told in the last 40 years. But it happened. Bigfoot began to descend into the ravine. He didn't jump, he didn't fall, he descended. With complete control, finding hand and footholds I couldn't even see. Moving that massive body with a grace that defied its heavy appearance. In a matter of seconds, he was at the bottom of the ravine, next to Timothy. "Grandma!" Timothy screamed, now terrified. "Grandma, help! Timothy, be quiet!" I yelled back. "Don't move!" From my vantage point, I could only partially see what was happening. Bigfoot crouched down. He had to crouch down quite a bit, because even crouching, he was enormous compared to a 5-year-old child. His long arms stretched out toward Timothy. I was about to do something stupid and desperate, jump into the ravine, try to protect my grandson with my own body, when I noticed something strange. Bigfoot was being ... kind. His movements were slow, cautious. His enormous hands, and they were hands, not claws, with distinct fingers and opposable thumbs touched Timothy with obvious care. He was examining his injured leg, the way a doctor would. Timothy had stopped screaming. He was looking up at the furry face above him, with an expression of childlike fascination overcoming his fear. And then he said something that made me cry. "Will you help me?" Bigfoot didn't answer, not with words. But he made a sound, low and soft, almost like a coo. And then, with incredible care, he picked Timothy up in his arms. An impossible creature saving a child ... Are you emotional? Comment with an emoji of what you're feeling. Seeing that creature, that impossible being, holding my grandson in its arms, was one of the most surreal and paradoxically beautiful things I have ever witnessed in my life. Timothy looked tiny against Bigfoot's hairy chest. The creature held him with a gentleness that completely contradicted its intimidating appearance. One enormous hand, the size of a shovel, rested on Timothy's back. The other was under his legs, with obvious care not to touch his injured leg. And then Bigfoot began to climb. I don't know how he did it. The ravine had almost vertical walls in places, loose soil, unstable rocks. I, a grown woman in reasonable shape, wouldn't have been able to climb it without equipment. But he scaled that earthen wall like a ladder. He used one hand at a time, the other always holding Timothy firmly. He found support where there seemed to be none. His feet, which I now realized were enormously size 45 or larger, found small ledges and roots that supported him without slipping. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, his head appeared above the edge of the ravine, then his shoulders, and then he was standing again at ground level, still holding Timothy securely. We stared at each other for a long moment, me and that being that shouldn't exist. There was something in its eyes, something I read as expectation. Was it waiting for me to react? To do something? Slowly, very slowly, I extended my arms. Can I take it back? Bigfoot took a step toward me. Just one. And then he bent down, that controlled movement again, and gently, so gently placed Timothy in my arms. When I took my grandson back, when I felt his small, real weight against me, I began to sob uncontrollably. "Thank you," I whispered, looking up at that impossible face. Thank you, thank you, thank you, ... double quotes. Bigfoot looked at me for another moment, and then he did something even more surprising. He placed a hand, that enormous hand, covered in hair, but undeniably resembling a human hand, gently on top of Timothy's head. It was a brief touch, almost like a blessing. And then he stepped back. "Wait," I said, my voice hoarse. I need to know you're real. No one will believe me." He stopped. He looked at us, me and Timothy in my arms. For a second, I thought he would stay. That maybe we could. What? Talk? Become friends? Prove to the world that he existed? But then, he shook his head. It was a small but decisive movement. And in that simple gesture, I understood. He didn't want to be found. He didn't want to be tested. His survival depended on remaining a myth. And then he turned and walked back into the forest. Each step was silent despite his size. Within seconds, he had disappeared among the trees and shadows, as if he had never been there. "Grandma," Timothy said against my shoulder, his voice small and frightened but also amazed. "Who was that big?" "Man, it wasn't a man, dear," I replied, still looking at where the creature had disappeared. It was ... It was a friend. A special friend who helped us. Would you have let him go? Or would you have tried to prove that he exists? I drove Timothy back home. It took almost an hour because I had to carry him the whole way, and several times I had to stop to rest and reorient myself. When we finally got past the line of trees and I saw our cabin, Harold was there, the truck parked in the yard, running towards us with a face white with worry. "Maggie? Oh my God, Maggie, I was about to call the police. Where were you?" "Harold," I said, my voice trembling with exhaustion and emotion. "You won't believe what happened. Timothy fell into a ravine and something saved him. Something that shouldn't exist." I told the whole story while Harold drove frantically to the hospital in Estacada. Timothy had a slight fracture in his tibia and several scratches and bruises, but nothing serious. While the doctors examined him and put on the cast, I told the same story to them, to the nurses. To anyone who asked how a 5-year-old child survived an 8-meter fall with only a broken leg. And that's when I realized that nobody believed in me. Harold was looking at me with that cautious expression people have when they don't want to upset someone who's clearly in shock or confused. The doctors exchanged glances. A nurse murmured something about trauma and stress. "I'm not making this up," I insisted, my voice rising. "There was a Bigfoot. He saved Timothy. He came down into the ravine and brought him back." "Of course, dear," Harold said, placing his hand on my shoulder condescending. "Of course. You've been through a lot today. Let's go home. You need to rest." But I wasn't making it up. And Timothy confirmed my story in the way a 5-year-old could, with confused but consistent details about the very hairy giant man who rescued him and was very kind and smelled like. The forest, nobody believed him either. They said he hit his head when he fell, that he was confused, that children have vivid imaginations. And so began the loneliest 40 years of my life. The first few years were the worst. My son Robert, Timothy's father, forbade me from telling the story to his son. "You're confusing him, Mom," he said accusingly. "He's having nightmares now because of your crazy stories about monsters in the forest." "It's not a monster," I protested. "And it's not a story, it really happened." But Robert wouldn't listen, and when I insisted, when I couldn't simply let the truth die, he began to limit Timothy's visits. First, it was only alternate weekends, then once a month. Eventually, he simply stopped bringing the boy. Harold tried to support me at first. He really tried. But as the years went by and my obsession, as he called it, didn't lessen, his patience ran out. "Maggie, you need to stop this," he'd say. "People are talking. They think you're getting senile. I'm not senile. I saw what I saw. Then maybe, he said carefully, you should talk to someone. A therapist, someone who can help you process what really happened that day. What he really meant was someone who can convince you that you hallucinated. I eventually went to see a therapist, not because I thought I needed one, but because Harold insisted, and I didn't want to lose him too. Dr. Patricia Hendricks was a pleasant woman in her 50s, with thick-rimmed glasses and a perpetually professional expression. Have you ever been forced to go to therapy for something that wasn't crazy? I sat in her office every week for 6 months, retelling the same story over and over again. She took notes, nodded understandingly, and gently, always so gently, suggested alternative explanation. Margaret, is it possible that under the extreme stress of seeing her grandson injured, her brain created a narrative to process the trauma? The human brain is incredible in its ability to fill in gaps, to create memories that make emotional sense, even if they aren't literally true. I know the difference between a real memory and an illusion, I replied firmly. Of course you know, she agreed in the tone you use with children and confused people. But we also know that memories can be altered, especially under extreme emotional stress. It's possible that what you saw was a bear, or even a large man, and your brain transformed it into something more ... extraordinary. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. What does Timothy say today about that day? That really hurt me because Timothy, now 10 years old, had begun to change his story. When asked about the day in the forest, he would say vague things like, I don't remember well, or I think there was someone there, but it was a long time ago. Robert had done an efficient job of convincing his son that it was all just childhood imagination. Dr. Hendricks finally suggested medication. Just something mild, she said, to help with the obsessive fixation, to give you peace of mind. I left her office and never went back. But the damage was done. My own family saw me as mentally unstable. The neighbors whispered when I walked by. Once, I overheard 2 women at the Estacada grocery store talking about that poor Maggie Sullivan who sees Bigfoot. Harold died in 1993, 9 years after the incident. Lung cancer, 40 years of smoking finally caught up with him. His last words to me in the hospital were, Maggie, I loved you. I always loved you. But I wish you had let that day go. This broke my heart in ways I can't adequately describe. I spent the following years in increasing loneliness. My children visited out of obligation at Christmas and on my birthday, but the visits were tense, filled with uncomfortable silences. My grandchildren, Timothy now had other cousins, called me Weird Grandma. In 2004, 20 years after the incident, I tried one last time to validate my experience. I sought out Bigfoot research groups, organizations dedicated to proving the existence of Sasquatch. I thought that, finally, I would find people who would believe me. It was a mistake. The researchers I encountered were a strange mix of genuine believers who saw Bigfoot in every shadow of the forest. I wasn't like that. I had seen something real. Specific, unique, and obvious charlatans seeking fame or money. When I told my story on an online forum, I was simultaneously adored as a key witness by the fanatics and ridiculed as just another confused grandma seeking attention by the skeptics. I didn't want attention. I wanted validation. I wanted someone, anyone, to believe that I wasn't crazy. How do you deal with the loneliness of not being believed? Eventually, I stopped talking about it completely. I learned that there was a very high price to pay for keeping the truth alive. The price was my reputation, my relationships, my peace. So I kept the secret inside me, locked away in a deep place where it constantly hurt, but at least it no longer cost me anything externally. The years passed. 1984 became 1994, then 2004, then 2014, and finally 2024. 40 years. 40 years carrying the truth alone. Until 3 weeks ago. It was an ordinary Tuesday in September when my life changed for the second time. I was living alone in the same house, now far too large and quiet for an 83-year-old woman. My joints ached, my eyesight wasn't what it used to be, and most days I wondered if it was worth waking up again. Not in a suicidal wage, just that deep existential weariness that comes from living too long without purpose. The mailman knocked on the door around 10 in the morning. "Package for you, Mrs. Sullivan. You need to sign here." It was a large padded envelope, the kind used for sending important documents. There was no return address, just my name and address handwritten in careful, neat handwriting. I took the envelope inside, sat in my worn armchair by the window, and opened it with fingers trembling with arthritis. Inside there were 3 things. The first was a photograph, a color photo, with a digital timestamp in the corner, indicating it was taken in August 2024, just a month ago. The photo showed a clearing in the forest, and in the center of the clearing was an elderly man wearing a red flannel shirt and jeans. It took me about 5 seconds to recognize who it was. Timothy. My grandson, Timothy. Now a 45-year-old man, bald, with a prominent belly but unmistakably himself. I hadn't seen him in person for over 10 years since his father's funeral. We had barely exchanged Christmas cards in recent years. But it wasn't Timothy who made me gasp and drop the photo on the floor with trembling hands. That was the person standing behind him in the photo, a Bigfoot. No, it wasn't the same one. This one was different, older perhaps, with more graying fur on the sides of its face, but undeniably real, undeniably there in the photo. Standing perhaps 3 meters behind Timothy, partially obscured by shadows but visible enough that there was no doubt. Wow. Would you believe it if you saw a picture like this? With my hands still trembling, I picked up the second thing from the envelope. A letter. It was from Timothy. The handwriting was his. I recognized it from the few times he had sent me notes as a child. Dear Grandma Maggie, I know it's been a long time since we had a proper conversation. I know I failed you, that I let Dad convince me you were wrong, that day in the forest was just a figment of my childhood memory. I spent 40 years of my life believing you had made it all up. I was wrong. Grandma, they are real, and they remember you. 3 months ago, I returned to that forest for the first time in decades. I don't know exactly maybe a midlife crisis, maybe curiosity, maybe some part of me that never really believed the official version of the story. I camped near the old ravine where I fell as a child on the second night he showed up. Not the same one, this one was different, older. But he came to my campsite and, Grandma, he knew my name. He made a sound that was unmistakably Tim-the ... double quotes. He knew who I was. And when I put my hand on my chest and said, "Do you know my grandmother?" He nodded. He really nodded, like a human would. Then he did something incredible. He picked up a branch and drew in the dirt. He drew a small figure, a child, a medium figure, presumably you, and a large figure himself or one of his kind. And then he pointed to me, then to the drawing of the child. He was telling me that he remembered that day. Grandma, I spent 40 years thinking you were crazy. 40 years feeling guilty, but also relieved to have been convinced that none of it was real. And now I've discovered that you were right all along. I can't express how much I regret it. How sorry I am for all those lost years, for all the times I didn't believe you, for all the visits I canceled because it was uncomfortable to hear you talk about that day. The photo I included was taken with a trail camera that I set up. He allowed it. It's as if he wanted me to have proof to show you. There's more. There's a third thing in the envelope. Please look at it. I'll come back to visit you soon. In person this time. I have 40 years of apologies to make. With all my love and deepest regret, Timothy, tears were streaming freely down my face now. 40 years. 40 years of loneliness, of doubt, of being called crazy. And my grandson finally believed in me. With trembling hands, I picked up the third item from the envelope. It was an object, heavy, wrapped in protective fabric. I carefully unwrapped it. It was a stone. No, not just any stone, it was a stone tool. Clearly worked, with deliberately chipped edges to create a sharp blade. The kind of tool ancient peoples used, but this one was different. It was enormous. The handle where you would hold it had to accommodate a hand 3 times the size of a human hand. Stuck to the tool was a small post-it note with another note from Timothy. He gave it to me. He said through gestures that it was what saved you and me that day. A gift, proof, a connection between our family and his. I held that impossible stone tool and cried like I hadn't cried since Harold's funeral. I cried because of 40 years of loneliness. I cried with relief at finally being believed. I cried because of the sadness of all. The time wasted, and I wept with joy even at 83 years old, even so close to the end of my life, at finally having validation. Imagine carrying a truth for 40 years and finally being believed. Would you have resisted? After crying until I had no more tears left, I sat down with that stone tool in my lap and thought deeply about what to do next. I had proof now, physical proof, a tool that no human had ever made, a photo that unequivocally showed a Bigfoot, and the testimony of my own grandson confirming everything I had said for 4 decades. My first instinct was to call everyone who had doubted me, to call Robert before he died and say, "See, I was right," to call Dr. Hendricks and demand an apology, to post the photo online and watch the scientific world collapse. But then I thought of Bigfoot, who had saved Timothy. I thought of the gentleness of that touch on my grandson's head, the way he had recoiled so as not to frighten me, the deliberate choice to remain hidden for millennia in order to survive. They had trusted me once, that day in the forest, and now they were trusting Timothy. If I made this public, if I used this evidence to validate my own reputation, what would happen to them? Hunters would come, scientists would come, the government would come, everyone wanting to capture, study, dissect, exploit. The forest would be invaded by film crews, tourists, researchers, and the Bigfoot, who had survived by remaining myths, would have nowhere left to hide. It was an impossible choice. My validation versus their safety. I was an 83-year-old woman who had carried the truth alone for 40 years. I had paid the price of being called crazy, of losing my family, of living in isolation. And now, finally, I had the chance to prove that I had always been right. But looking at that stone tool, a gift, a gesture of connection between species, I realized that some truths are more valuable when they remain secret. Some things are more important than being vindicated. I decided I wouldn't make this public. Not yet. Maybe never. Instead, I did something else. Would you give up proving your truth to protect something greater? 3 days later, Timothy arrived. He drove all the way from Seattle, where he now lived. When he opened the door, we just stared at each other for a long moment. He was noticeably older, deep lines around his eyes, completely gray hair on the sides. I was probably much older than he remembered, too. "Grandma," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. So sorry." I opened my arms and he entered them as he had done when he was a child. We stood there in the doorway, embracing, crying, 40 years of distance finally beginning to heal. We sat in my living room and talked for hours. Timothy told me all about his encounters over the past few weeks. He'd returned to the forest 4 times, and each time the same Bigfoot had appeared. They had developed a rudimentary form of communication. Through gestures, drawings in the dirt, and sheer patience, He has a name, Grandma. At least, he has a sound he uses when he points to himself. It sounds like Kara or something like that, and he made me understand that he's old. Very old. He implies that he was there, that day, 40 years ago. That he's the one who saved me. 40 years, I repeated, hardly able to believe it. He remembers me after 40 years? They live a long time, Grandma. At least that's what I understood from his gestures. And they have long memories. Oral traditions, stories passed down. You safeguarded their secret for 4 decades, even at a cost. He knows this somehow. And he's grateful. I showed Timothy my decision not to make any of this public. I expected him to protest, to insist that the world needed to know. But instead, he slowly nodded. I understand, Grandma. And I agree. But ... double quotes. He hesitated. What if there was a middle ground? What if we could document everything for posterity? For eventual science, but keep it secret for now? Let the right people know, people we can trust? Which people? I asked suspiciously. There's a biologist at the University of Oregon, Dr. James Whitmore. He's been studying Bigfoot sightings for 30 years, but in a scientific, serious way. He's not a thrill seeker. He really wants to understand and protect. I've done some research. He has publications on the conservation of remote habitats, on protecting wilderness areas from climate change. I think he's someone we can trust. I thought about that for a long moment. And you trust him completely? I spoke with him briefly. I haven't revealed anything specific yet, just sounded out his opinions. Grandma, he believes that if Bigfoot exists, and he thinks it probably does, our responsibility isn't to prove its existence to the world. It's to protect its habitat and its privacy. He said that verbatim. It was a risk. But Timothy was right. If something happened to me, if I died tomorrow, all this evidence would die with me. And that would be a waste. All right, I finally agreed. But we'll do it our way. With strict conditions. And if at any point I feel that Dr. Whitmore is going to expose this publicly, that's it. Understood? Timothy smiled. That smile I remembered from when I was a child. Understood, Grandma. Thank you. For everything. For carrying this for so long. For never giving up on the truth even when everyone else gave up on you. And there, sitting in the living room where I'd spent so many years alone, we began to plan what to do with the greatest secret unknown to humanity, Dr. James Whitmore arrived at my house on a rainy Thursday in October. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 45, with brown hair beginning to turn gray at the temples, thin-rimmed glasses, and a gentle manner that immediately put me at ease. Mrs. Sullivan, he said, gently squeezing my hand as if afraid I might break, it's an honor to meet you. Timothy told me a little about your experience. I'm here just to listen, without judgment, without expectations. Just to understand. I liked him immediately. We spent the entire afternoon talking. I told the whole story, every detail I could remember from that day in 1984, the reactions of the people, the 40 years of isolation. I showed him the photo, the stone tool, Timothy's letter. Dr. Whitmore listened to everything without interrupting, occasionally taking notes in a worn notebook, but mostly just listening. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, Mrs. Sullivan, I believe you. Those 4 words, coming from a respected scientist, meant more to me than he could have imagined. Thank you, I whispered. And more than that, he continued, I completely agree with your decision not to make this public. Sasquatch, if we can even call them that, though I suspect they have a name of their own, survived by avoiding humans. Forcing them into the light now would potentially sentence them to extinction. So why do you want to be involved? I asked. If you agree that it should remain secret? If you were the scientist, would you resist the temptation to reveal it to the world? Dr. Whitmore adjusted his glasses, a nervous gesture. Because I'm a scientist, Mrs. Sullivan, I can't simply ignore the greatest biological discovery of the last 1,000 years. But being a scientist also means having responsibility. It means understanding that not all knowledge should be turned into a public spectacle. It means protecting what we study. And how exactly do you intend to do that? With your permission, and Timothy's, I would like to organize a small expedition. No more than 3 people besides us researchers I trust completely. We would go into the forest, try to make contact as Timothy did, and document what we found. But everything would be kept in a private archive, accessible only to a very select circle of researchers dedicated to conservation. What if they don't show up? What if they only showed up for me and Timothy because there was something special about that encounter? So we returned empty-handed and no harm was done. But Mrs. Sullivan, based on what Timothy described, the gift they gave him, the way they continue to interact with him, I think they want some level of connection with us. Not exposure, not fame, but perhaps mutual understanding. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. What if we messed up? What if Dr. Whitmore, despite his good intentions, ended up exposing them? What if more scientists got involved and things spiraled out of control? But I looked at Timothy, who had sat quietly throughout the conversation, and I saw trust in his eyes. He believed in Dr. Whitmore. And after 40 years carrying this secret alone, perhaps it was time to confide in someone else too. Okay, I finally agreed. But I'm going to. Dr. Whitmore and Timothy exchanged worried glances. Grandma, Timothy began gently, you're 83 years old. The trail to that part of the forest is difficult. It takes hours of walking over uneven terrain. I don't know if I'm going to, I repeated firmly. It all started with me. If they're going to show up for anyone, it'll be for me. And I didn't spend 40 years waiting for this to be left behind now because I'm old. Dr. Whitmore smiled. Mrs. Sullivan, it will be an honor to have you with us. Grandma won't give up. Would you respect her wish? Comment yes. We spent the next 2 weeks planning. Dr. Whitmore brought along 2 other researchers he trusted. Dr. Lisa Park, a primatologist specializing in nonverbal communication, and Marcus Santos, a field biologist with decades of experience observing wildlife. Both signed strict confidentiality agreements and fully understood the sensitive nature of the expedition. We also had to prepare me physically. At 83 years old, I wasn't exactly in shape for mountain trails. Timothy helped me with short daily hikes, building endurance. Dr. Whitmore arranged for a lightweight but sturdy walking stick. Dr. Park taught me breathing exercises for high-altitude terrain. And so, on a cold November morning, we set off. There were 6 of us in total. Me, Timothy, Dr. Whitmore, Dr. Park, Marcus, and a local trail guide named Tom Reeves, whom Timothy had hired. Tom didn't know the true purpose of the expedition, only that we were doing wildlife research in the forest. The hike was brutal. Even with all the preparation, every step was a struggle. My legs burned, my lungs ached, and more than once I considered giving up. But Timothy was always by my side, offering a supportive arm, words of encouragement, reminders of why we were doing this. It took us 5 hours to reach the spot where Timothy had camped during his previous meetings. It was a small clearing, surrounded by ancient cedars and giant pines, with a small stream running along the side. We set up camp quickly, 3 tents, a small campfire, minimal equipment, and now? Asked Dr. Park, looking around at the dense forest that surrounded us. Just ... wait, we're waiting, Timothy confirmed. Other times, it appeared after nightfall. But there was never a specific pattern. Sometimes it happened the first night, sometimes it took 2 days. We spent the rest of the afternoon in nervous silence. Dr. Whitmore checked his documentation equipment repeatedly. Trail cameras, audio recorders, a notebook for notes. The surroundings, looking for signs of large animals passing by. Dr. Park practiced non-threatening communication gestures. And me? I just sat on a rock near the stream, looking out at the forest, and waited to meet again the being who had saved my grandson 40 years ago. Night fell quickly on the forest, as it always does in the mountains. One moment there was light filtering through the treetops. The next, we were enveloped in almost complete darkness, broken only by our small campfire and the headlamps we used when we needed to move around the camp. Dr. Whitmore had positioned trail cameras in a circle around the clearing, configured to capture any movement. Marcus had scattered what he called auditory attractors, small speakers that played low-volume forest sounds, creating a more natural sonic environment that could camouflage our presence. The idea, he explained in a low voice, is that if they are used to certain sound patterns in the forest, our presence will stand out. Less, but to me, all that equipment, all that scientific preparation seemed wrong. 40 years ago, there were no cameras or planning. There was just a desperate grandmother and a kind creature who chose to help. I wanted to believe that the simplicity of that connection was what mattered, not all that technology. We ate a cold meal cereal bars and dried fruit to minimize strong smells that might scare away any wildlife. Afterward, we sat around the campfire as night deepened, each lost in our questioning your own sanity, your own memories. There were nights when I woke up thinking that maybe, just maybe, everyone was right and I was really crazy. What kept you believing? Timothy? I replied simply, even when he was a child and was already being convinced that he had imagined everything. I saw something in his eyes when the subject came up, a glimmer of, not exactly certainty, but recognition, as if part of him knew it had happened. That kept me grounded. And also, I paused. Searching for the right words, there was the texture of memory. Real memories have weight. They have sensory details that fantasies don't have. I could smell the moss and wet earth. I could remember exactly how my legs trembled with exhaustion. I could see every individual hair on his face when he looked at me. These aren't things you make up. Do you know the difference between a real and an imaginary memory? Dr. Whitmore nodded thoughtfully. There's a theory in psychology about luminous memories so vivid and emotionally charged that they are recorded with extraordinary clarity. Your memory of that day seems to be exactly that. It's not just a luminous memory, I said firmly. It's a real memory of something real. I believe you, he replied. I'm just saying that your certainty, even in the face of universal disbelief, is remarkable and scientifically interesting. We talked for a few more hours, our voices low so as not to disturb the forest. Tom, our guide, eventually retired to his tent, clearly thinking we were an eccentric group of researchers on a silly mission. Marcus and Dr. Park began discussing non-threatening approach techniques for great apes, and I just watched the shadows between the trees, waiting. Around midnight, Timothy touched my shoulder. Grandma, you should rest. It could take days. Not yet, I replied. There was something in the air, a quality of expectation, of observant presence. He's here. What? Doctor. Whitmore immediately became alert. Did you hear something? I didn't hear it. I felt it. It might sound crazy, but she was right. Something had changed in the forest's energy. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, owls, the wind rustling through the leaves, had become quieter. Not completely silent, but more cautious. Marcus noticed as well. She's right. Something big is moving around there. He pointed vaguely northeast. The smaller animals have become quiet. That's what happens when a large predator is present. Not a predator, I corrected. An observer. We sat there, tension mounting. each of us staring intently into the darkness beyond the reach of the campfire light. The trail cameras continued to record silently. My heart pounded against my ribs, part anticipation, part fear, part something I can't quite name. And then I saw. Not everything, just a glimpse. A huge shape moving between two trees, perhaps 20 meters away. Only for a second, then it disappeared again. Into the shadows. There, I whispered, pointing. Everyone looked, but the shape was already gone. I didn't see anything, Dr. Park murmured. I saw him, Timothy said. He's there. Kara is there. And then, from the darkness, came a sound. It wasn't quite a growl or a call. It was something in between, low, resonant, like the sound you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. It was a sound that said, I am here. I know you are here. And I am deciding if you are a threat, Doctor. Whitmore had tears streaming down his face. Marcus was frozen, his hand hovering near his camera, but not daring to pick it up. Dr. Park's mouth agape in silent shock. And me? I stood up, slowly, painfully, my old knees protesting. I took one step toward the trees, then another. Grandma, no! Timothy whispered urgently. But I kept walking, leaving the circle of light of the campfire, entering the darkness. I wasn't afraid. Not this time. There was something I needed to say. Something I had carried for 40 years. Thank you, I said aloud, my old but firm voice echoing through the clearing. Thank you for saving my grandson. Thank you for your kindness. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry if our presence here today bothers you, but I needed to come. I needed to see you again. I needed you to know that I never forgot. Silence. And then, from the absolute darkness, a figure began to appear. It's appearing. Is your heart racing? He moved toward the light very slowly, one step at a time, giving us time to adjust to his presence. And my God, he was exactly as I remembered him, and yet completely different. 40 years had passed since our first encounter. He was visibly older. His coat had extensive gray patches, especially around his face and chest. His shoulders, still broad and powerful, had a slight curve that hadn't been there before. And when he moved, I noticed a slight limp in his right leg. But it was the eyes, those deep, incomprehensibly intelligent eyes, that were identical. They looked at me across the distance of 40 years and recognized me. I saw recognition there, clear as day. He stopped about 5 meters from me, close enough to see clearly but far enough away not to be threatening. Behind me, I could hear the others completely silent. They didn't even dare to breathe deeply. And then Kara, because it was him, I was sure, the same being who had saved Timothy, did something extraordinary. He lowered himself, not completely sitting, but in a crouching position that brought him closer to my height. It was a gesture of ... what? Respect? Non-threat? Perhaps both. I took another step toward it. My knees trembled, partly from age and exhaustion, partly from the pure adrenaline of being meters away from a creature that science said didn't exist. Do you remember me? I asked, knowing he probably didn't understand the words, but hoping he understood the intention. Kara tilted his head, another surprisingly human gesture. And then he raised one of his enormous hands and pointed, first at me, then at Timothy behind me, then at the ground, where he traced a shape that took me a moment to recognize he was drawing the ravine. He was indicating that he remembered that day. Yes, I whispered, tears beginning to fall. Yes, that day. You saved him. You saved us. And then Kara did something that made me let out an audible sob. He placed his hand, that enormous, hairy hand, with thick fingers but undeniably human-like, on his own chest. And he tapped it twice, thump, thump, heart. It was pointing to the heart, emotion. It was trying to tell me something about feelings. He has a heart. He feels. Behind me, I heard Dr. Park whisper in utter astonishment, "Oh my God, symbolic emotional communication. This is a level of cognition that we've only seen in humans and maybe some great apes." "He's more than just a great ape," I said, not taking my eyes off Kara. "He's a person. Different from us, but a person," Kara lowered his hand and just watched me. There was something in his eyes, something sad, something weary. I thought of all the years he had lived, hidden, always afraid of being discovered. I thought of how many of his kind had been lost. I thought of the loneliness of being one of the last of his kind. And I realized we had something in common, he and I. We had both spent decades isolated because of that day in the forest. I was isolated because no one believed me. He was isolated because being found would mean the end. Very slowly, I took another step toward him. Now I was perhaps 3 meters away from him. I could smell the forest scent emanating from him, salts, moss, pine resin, something else that was distinctly animal, but not unpleasant. "I protected your secret," she told him. "For 40 years, everyone thought I was crazy, but I didn't tell them where to find you. I won't tell them now either. You're safe." He looked at me for a long moment, and then he did something that will be part of my memories until my last day. He extended his hand toward me. Not aggressively, not to take it, just ... offered, palm up, like he had done 40 years ago with Timothy, a gesture of peace, of connection. With hands trembling with emotion and age, I extended my own hand. It seemed so small, so fragile compared to his. When our hands touched, my wrinkled skin against his thick, hairy palm was like closing a circle that had stood open for 4 decades. We stayed like that for maybe 10 seconds. I don't need to explain what that meant. You either feel it or you don't, and I felt it, a connection across species, across time, across all the pain and loneliness of the intervening years. A recognition of our shared humanity, even though we are so different. Behind me, I heard Timothy sobbing. Dr. Whitmore was murmuring, "Amazing, amazing," repeatedly. The cameras captured everything, preserving for posterity the moment when human and Sasquatch greeted each other as equals. Finally, Kara gently released my hand. He looked at the others in the camp. Timothy, Dr. Whitmore, Dr. Park, Marcus. He was assessing, deciding whether we were a threat or not. Then he did something unexpected. He gestured toward the forest behind him, then toward us. It took me a moment to understand what he was offering. He wanted us to follow him. "He wants us to follow him," Timothy said quietly, coming to my side. "He wants to show us something." "Is it safe?" Marcus asked, and it was a fair question. Following an unknown creature into dense forest in the middle of the night wasn't exactly standard research protocol. "It's safe," I replied with a confidence that came from a deep, instinctive place. He wouldn't hurt us. If he wanted to do harm, he would have done it when I approached alone. Dr. Whitmore quickly checked his equipment. "I'll go." "Who else?" "Me," Timothy said immediately. "And one," Dr. Park added. "This may be the only chance any human being has ever had to see how they live. I can't miss this." Marcus agreed as well. Only Tom, our guide, chose to stay. "You're all crazy," he grumbled. "I'm going to stay here and make sure at least one person survives. To tell the authorities when you're all gone." Kara waited patiently while we prepared, grabbing headlamps, small cameras, water. Then he turned and began walking into the forest. "We continue. Would you follow a Bigfoot into the dark of the forest?" "Comment! I would!" The hike was surreal. Kara moved through the forest with silent ease, avoiding branches and obstacles that we constantly tripped over. He adjusted his pace for us, especially for me, since I was by far the slowest. Occasionally he would stop, look back to make sure everyone was still following, then continue. I wasn't sure how long we'd walked. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 40. Time loses its meaning in a dark forest. But eventually, we came to something that made us all stop in utter shock. It was a cave. No, not just any. Cavit was an opening between massive rocks that created a natural shelter, and around the entrance, there were obvious signs of habitation? Not in the human sense, but there were structures, branches deliberately placed to create windbreaks, stones arranged in a circle where they had clearly made fire in the past, and most surprisingly, tools. Stone tools like the one Timothy had given me, but also wooden tools, pointed sticks for digging, notched rods for fishing, woven plant fiber containers for carrying things. It was primitive technology, but it was undoubtedly technology. They're not just intelligent, Dr. Whitmore whispered in astonishment. They have material culture, tool making. That puts them on the same cognitive level as early hominids. Kara led us to the cave entrance and gestured for us to enter. It was clearly an invitation to go in. Timothy and I exchanged glances. We were being invited into his home, something that probably no human had ever seen before. We went in. Inside, the cave was surprisingly spacious. Our headlamps illuminated a space that was perhaps 10 meters wide and plunged into darkness. The floor was covered with what appeared to be dried moss and leaves, clearly collected and placed there deliberately to create a soft sleeping surface. And then we saw something that made us all gasp. There were others. 3 other Sasquatch were at the back of the cave. One was female, slightly smaller than Kara, with more delicate facial features. 2 were young, not children, but perhaps equivalent to human teenagers. They all looked at us with a mixture of curiosity and obvious caution. Kara made soft sounds, communication clearly directed at others. They weren't words as we know them, but neither were they meaningless animal grunts. There were patterns, variations in tone, something that definitely sounded like language. The female responded with her own sounds. After a few minutes of this exchange, during which it became obvious, they were discussing whether our presence was acceptable, she slowly approached. Dr. Park, perhaps driven by her primatologist's professional instinct, lowered herself, making herself appear smaller and less threatening. The female seemed to appreciate this and moved closer. And then, to our utter astonishment, the female picked something up from the cave floor and held it out to Dr. Park. It was an object. It took a moment to recognize what it was. It was a flower. A wildflower, already a little wilted but carefully preserved. She's offering a gift. A flower. Who's crying? Oh my God, Dr. Park whispered, tears streaming down her face. She's making a social gesture. Gift-giving is sophisticated cultural behavior. This is ... double. Quotes her voice faltered. Dr. Park accepted the flower with both hands, then bowed in deep reverence, a universal gesture of respect and gratitude. The female Sasquatch responded with what could only be a smile. Yes, a smile, the corners of her mouth turning slightly upward. We spent perhaps an hour in that cave. Kara showed us more of their life, how they process certain foods using stones to crack hard nuts, how they wove plant fibers to create simple ropes, how they carved marks into stones that seemed to be some kind of counting record. The 2 young men, after overcoming their initial shyness, approached curiously. One of them touched my gray hair with obvious fascination. It was a texture unlike anything in his world. The other examined Marcus's camera with interest, touching it gently but not trying to take it. It was like making contact with an alien culture, except they weren't aliens, they were distant relatives, a branch of the tree of life that followed a different but no less valid path than ours. Finally, Kara gestured toward the entrance. He was politely indicating that it was time for us to go. We had been honored with a glimpse into his world, but we were not part of it. We didn't belong there. Before leaving, I turned to Kara and placed my hand on my own chest, tapping it twice as he had done before. I was trying to communicate, I understand, I see you. You are important. He inclined his head in acknowledgement, and then he led us back through the forest to our camp, keeping in the shadows as we approached the campfire light. With one last look, those deep eyes meeting mine once more, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. We stood there at the edge of the camp for a long time, nobody speaking. Everyone processing what we had just witnessed. Dr. Whitmore finally broke the silence. This changes everything. Everything. We thought about non-human cognition, about consciousness, about where we draw the line between animal and person. This changes absolutely everything. No, I said firmly. It doesn't change anything. Everyone looked at me confused, because we're not going to tell the world. Not yet. Maybe never. Back at camp, we sat around the rebuilt campfire as the reality of what we had witnessed began to fully sink in. The trail cameras had captured everything, at least the parts that happened within their range. Dr. Whitmore had dozens of photographs. Dr. Park had recorded audio. Marcus had video. We had irrefutable proof. Proof that would solve one of the greatest mysteries of cryptozoology. Proof that would change biology textbooks, force a reassessment of primate evolution, and potentially rewrite our understanding of non-human intelligence. And we were about to destroy everything. We can't do this, Dr. Park said, her voice anguished. Do you understand what we're throwing away? This is career-defining discovery. This is Nobel Prize territory. That's genocide, Timothy interrupted calmly. Because that's what would happen. The moment the world knows they exist, that there's a small population living in the Oregon forests, what do you think happens? Government protection, Marcus suggested. List of endangered species. Protected. Conservation area. Dr. Whitmore shook his head. You're being naive. First would come the scientists, hundreds of them. Then the media, then the tourists. The forest would be overrun. Every cave explored. Every potential habitation site monitored 24/7s. And then ... double quotes. He paused, his voice growing dark. Then the others would come. What others? I asked, although I had a bad feeling. Military personnel interested in their physical capabilities. Corporations wanting to study their physiology for potential biomedical applications. Zoos offering obscene sums of money for live specimens. Hunters wanting trophies. And worse, extremist religious groups who would see them as freaks or demons that need to be exterminated. Dr. Park was crying now. But it's not fair. A discovery of this magnitude. How can we simply bury it? Because some truths, I said softly, are more important protected than revealed. Kara entrusted us with this tonight. He showed us his family, his home, his life. He did this not because he wants to be discovered, but because ... I think he wanted at least some humans to know that they are more than a myth. That they are real, they are intelligent, they are worthy of respect. But he also wanted this, knowing that we would keep the secret. How do you know? Marcus challenged. How do you know he doesn't want to be known? Maybe they're tired of hiding? Maybe they want the world to know they exist. If they wanted to be known, Timothy replied, they would have come out of the shadows long ago. They've had thousands of years to make official contact. Instead, they chose survival through invisibility. We have no right to take that choice away from them. We argued for hours. Dr. Park passionately argued that scientific knowledge is a fundamental human value, and that suppressing it is a betrayal of the entire human endeavor to understand the world. Marcus pointed out that official protection, despite risks, could guarantee the species' survival in ways that hiding could not. Climate change was destroying habitats. Human development was constantly advancing, and without official recognition, they were vulnerable in ways they could not defend themselves against. But Dr. Whitmore, surprisingly, sided with me. You're right about the risks, But we've already seen what happens when humans protect species. Zoos, reserves that are essentially prisons, breeding programs where individuals are treated as genetic resources instead of beings with their own agency, and that's with animals that we recognize don't have human-level intelligence. With Sasquatch, which clearly has cognition close to or equivalent to ours, it could be much worse. They could be classified as subhuman and used for experimentation. We've seen this story before in humanity. It doesn't end well. So what's the alternative? Dr. Park challenged. We pretend none of this happened? No, I said. We document everything. We keep private records, protected data, available to a small circle of researchers dedicated to conservation. We work behind the scenes to protect forest habitats without revealing why. We've created a system of guardians, people who know who can pass knowledge on to trusted successors, but who never make it public unless it's absolutely necessary for the survival of the species. A secret society dedicated to protecting Sasquatch, Marcus said with slight sarcasm. Sounds like a crazy conspiracy. Conspiracy, I said, is what has kept them safe for millennia. Why stop now? Eventually, with obvious reluctance, everyone agreed. The recordings would be encrypted and securely stored. Scientific publications, if any, would be written in a way that concealed location and specific details. We would continue studying them, but always prioritizing their safety over our curiosity. And me? I finally had the validation I had sought for 40 years, but deciding to keep it secret didn't diminish its value. On the contrary, it transformed it into something more precious, a sacred secret, a trust between species. Before going to sleep that night, I looked at the forest one last time, and I swore I saw a dark shape among the distant trees, watching, making sure we had honored the trust he had placed in us. I slept better that night than I had in 40 years. We returned from the forest 3 days later, each of us permanently changed by the experience. Tom, our guide, still had no idea what had really happened, he thought. We were just eccentric researchers studying wildlife patterns. It was better that way. The following weeks were complicated. Dr. Park struggled tremendously with the decision not to publish. She had built her entire career around scientific discoveries, contributing to human knowledge. Keeping the greatest secret ever discovered went against every professional instinct I had. I dream about it every night, she confessed to me during one of our follow-up meetings. I see the woman offering me that flower. I see the young people looking at my camera with curiosity, and I wake up knowing that the world will never know. That I will die someday, and this knowledge dies with me, except for a small circle of people who can't do anything with it. Knowledge doesn't die, I argued. It lives within you. It changes how you see the world, how you conduct research, how you understand cognition and culture. Just because you can't publish it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. But I understood her. Frustration. She had spent 40 years desperate for someone to believe her. Now, she was asking scientists to suppress a belief she had finally validated. Marcus ended up leaving the project completely. I can't do this, he explained. I can't know they exist and do nothing to officially protect them. I'm sorry. He deleted all his recordings and cut off all contact with us. I hope he found peace in that choice. Dr. Whitmore, on the other hand, became more dedicated than ever. He began working with conservation groups to protect forest corridors in the Cascade Tree region, never revealing the true reason for his passion for this specific area. He managed to block multiple development projects through legal loopholes and public awareness campaigns about general biodiversity preservation. I'm protecting them, he told me, but in a way that nobody knows I'm specifically protecting them. It's frustrating and indirect, but it's what I can do. Timothy, my wonderful grandson, became a Regular visitor, not just to me, but to the forest. Once a month, he would return to camp near that clearing. Sometimes Kara would appear, sometimes not. But when she did appear, they had developed a rudimentary form of communication, a mixture of gestures, drawings in the earth, and pure patience. Timothy learned things about how they lived. They weren't just isolated individuals. There was a loose network of family groups scattered throughout the forests. They communicated over long distances, using sounds that carried for miles across mountains. They had something that could be called a religion or spirituality, reverence for specific places in the forest, rituals at certain times of the year, and they were dying. Not quickly, but inexorably. Each generation was smaller than the last. Many young did not survive to maturity, scarce resources, reduced territory, occasional encounters with humans that ended badly. Kara estimated, through gestures that took Timothy hours to decipher, that there were perhaps 50 individuals remaining in total. 50 Sasquatch in the entire world, all that remained of a species that probably once numbered in the thousands. This information put our decision in a different context. We weren't just keeping it a secret to protect them from human curiosity. We were participating in a slow extinction. If we did nothing, they would disappear within generations. If we did something, revealed it to the world, demanded protection, it could accelerate. Extinction through interference. There was no good answer. Grandma, Timothy asked me one night while we were having dinner in my kitchen, "Do you think we made the right choice?" I didn't answer immediately. It was a question that kept me awake many nights. "I don't know," I finally admitted. "I think there's no right choice here. Every option has terrible consequences." So we made a choice that respects their agency, that honors the fact that they chose to remain hidden. But if I'm wrong, ... My voice faltered. If the wrong choice means extinction happens and I could have prevented it ... then let's live with it, Timothy said firmly. Because the alternative is forcing them to live with our choices, and they've already lived with the consequences of humanity long enough. He was right, of course, but that didn't make the decision any less painful. 3 months after our expedition, I received an unexpected visit. 2 men in dark suits, with a type of presence I immediately recognized from my years of knowing how government operates. Ms. Sullivan, the taller man said, showing identification that indicated he was a federal agent, "May we come in? We have some questions about your recent activities in the Mount Hood National Forest." My heart sank. Had someone spoken? Had one of the trail cameras been found? Had Tom mentioned something to the wrong person? I let them in because I had no choice. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had sat alone for so many years, the same room where Timothy had brought me that envelope that changed everything. "Madame," the agent began carefully, "we are aware that you, along with your grandson and small group of researchers, spent several days camping in a remote forest area. We are also aware that the team included Dr. James Whitmore, a well-known primatologist with a long-standing interest in uncatalogued fauna. They didn't know everything, but they knew enough to be dangerous. We were just observing wildlife," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Nothing illegal about that, of course not," the agent readily agreed. "But we would like to see any documentation, photographs, or recordings of your trip. For biodiversity cataloging purposes, you understand." It was an obvious lie. They wanted to see what we had found. "We have nothing of interest," I lied back. "Just some common birds, deer tracks. Very boring, really." The 2 agents exchanged glances. Miss Sullivan II said, his voice harsher, "Let's be direct. There are certain governmental interests in confirming or denying the existence of uncatalogued species of great apes in North America. If you have information about such species, there is a national security need to share it." National security. Of course. It was always national security when the government wanted to hide or control something. I don't have that information, she said firmly. And even if I did, I'm not sure I would trust the government that allowed me to be called crazy for 40 years when I told the truth about what I saw. That was the wrong answer. I saw flashes of anger cross the first agent's face before he could control it. We visited for another 20 minutes, them asking increasingly specific questions, and me giving increasingly evasive answers. Finally, they got up to leave. Miss Sullivan, the taller agent, said at the door, his voice low and menacing, "There are laws about obstructing federal investigations, about withholding information of national security importance. I hope you're not doing anything that might put you in conflict with those laws." It was a veiled threat. But I was 83 years old and had spent 40 years being threatened with social scorn, with medical doubt, with family isolation. Two men in suits didn't scare me. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," I said, closing the door in their faces. The moment they left, I called Dr. Whitmore. "We need to move the recordings. Now, they know we found something, and so began a new chapter in this saga, keeping it a secret not only from humanity in general, but specifically from the government that most wanted to exploit it. I am writing this now, 6 months after that expedition into the forest, because I feel that time is running out. I am 83 years old. My health is declining. Doctors talk about options and palliative care with that tone that means the end is not far off. But before I go, I need to tell this story. I need at least some people reading this now to know the truth. Not all the details, not specific locations or information that could lead others to them, but the essential truth. They are real, they are intelligent, they deserve protection. Timothy will inherit files, encrypted recordings, photographs, research notes. He will become the next guardian of this secret. And when his time comes, he will pass it on to the next trusted person, and so on, through generations. This is how precious truths survive, not through public proclamation, but through careful transmission from trustworthy person to trustworthy person. Would you be worthy of carrying this secret? I often think about that night in the forest, about the look in Kara's eyes when our hands touched, about the gentleness of the woman offering a flower, about the curiosity of the young ones. And I marvel at the fact that on a planet with 8 billion humans, there are still enough wild places for an entire species to remain hidden. But for how long? Climate change is altering forests. Human development is constantly advancing. Every year, wilderness areas shrink. Drones and satellites make hiding places more difficult. And the human instinct to explore, catalog, and control everything remains as strong as ever. Kara and her kind are living on borrowed time. Perhaps decades. Perhaps only years. Eventually, someone other than us will find them. Someone without the common sense to keep a secret, and then the decision will be taken from our hands. I hope that when that day comes, and humanity will have evolved enough to treat them as people instead of specimens, to respect their autonomy instead of imposing our will, to protect them because it is right, not because they are valuable resources. But I'm not optimistic. I know humanity all too well. My life has been defined by 2 moments. A day in 1984, when Sasquatch saved my grandson, and a night in 2024, when I finally received validation. Between those moments were 40 years of loneliness, doubt, but also 40 years of maintaining faith when everyone said I was wrong. 40 years alone, but she never gave up on the truth. Comment if you were inspired. I regret nothing. I regret telling the truth even when no one believed me. I regret protecting a secret when there was finally proof. I regret choosing their safety over my own validation.